Hi, I'm Tracy Williams, the director of Coming Home. In spring of 2019, the MiraCosta College theater faculty and I sat together to decide our season. And on it, we decided to create our own theatrical piece. I decided to entitle it Coming Home. Our goal was to gather interviews, magazine articles, and book publications on the theme of veterans coming home to their families after long deployments. So we created what we were calling a verbatim devised piece, where all of the pieces of text being delivered were going to be word for word what those interviews had said, along with word for word pieces of books and magazines. We cast the show. We had set designers, lighting designers, sound designers, properties designers, and we were all set to go when the global pandemic hit. It was impossible to think that we would not continue with this project when so many people from our area and from our school had given us permission to host interviews with them and tell their stories. And so we've gone online. Taking our project in a very different direction, we decided to just go back to our materials and allow students to create monologues based on what they were seeing in that material. Some of these monologues that you're going to hear are interviews that are being covered by one or more people. So listen for that and see if you can figure out which ones are the same person being told from different points of view. So we've gone indoors, and the students have been asked to create these monologues, but also to conceive of them as little miniature films, each one standing on its own. They've gone into their homes, into their backyards, and into their neighborhoods to bring you what you are going to see today. We hope that you will enjoy the fruits of their labors and the offerings that they have created for you. Thank you.
So I was born in Maryland, and when I was 18 months, we moved to Okinawa, Japan, and then when I was 5, we came to Camp Pendleton, and then in 4th grade went to England. We were there for 3 years. And then my parents were separated, so we went to Utah, and my dad went to Hawaii, and he was there for 3 years. And then my parents got back together, and then we came back to Camp Pendleton, and my family's been here since. And so, even if he wasn't, like, overseas, he would do trainings and certain things. Like, he missed a good chunk of my birthdays. He missed, I think, 8 of my sister's birthdays. Like, he wasn't there for a birthday party, I think, until her 8th birthday. So, he was gone. A lot. He did 24 years, and he retired as Master Sergeant. He did signals intelligence. So it's just kind of like electronic warfare. When they used to do Morse code, he knew that. So it's a lot of, like, stuff we can't talk about. I'm super blessed because my mom never made it a trauma. So, like, I know I had friends growing up, and when their dads were gone, like, their moms wouldn't get out of bed, like, they didn't want to cook dinner. Yeah, so she's kind of running the show, and she would always keep us involved and busy. So we're always in soccer and basketball, and so we were always busy. We weren't really home because I feel like, but you're always in motion. My mom made my dad a hero in our house. So we were super patriotic, you know. It was always like, your dad's a hero, your dad's saving the world, your dad's Superman. My mom always made it glamorize, if that's the right word. She made it seem really cool. Like it was something to be proud of. It was what it was. Yeah, I mean, I was in kindergarten when he first deployed. Like, and before that, he had done trainings and, you know, had left home, so it was kind of all I knew. We would make really big banners, like, welcome home, our hero's home, and, like, posters. We did the yellow ribbon, so we did a big yellow ribbon around our tree when he was deployed so people knew. It was always, like, a big celebration. He did be, like, there's, like, a tank on base because they would come into, like, the marina. Like, it was just really close to my house, and they had these, like, pictures on the tank and, like, a big banner, and we would all have these, like, matching outfits and little flags. It was always a big, big, happy day. I remember waiting up for the boat, for the ship, just, like, standing there and, like, just, like, all the excitement and watching the ship come in. And we would have, like I know my grandparents came, and we had Dodgers tickets for my dad and his favorite snacks and stuff. That was really, yeah, I mean, I don't remember much more than that. And just, like, watching the ship come in, having that whole thing, just going home. Like, my dad sort of likes just, like, hang out. He just wanted to sit on the couch and, like, exist in the house. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we did any big dinners or parties. More like just be.
The most important thing is obviously your family. Seeing your family. It's pretty much at the end of the day, it's your family. Like, you're excited to be back, but you're just excited to see your family. Yeah, you don't really care about, like, you care about the food, like, of course you do. Like, you haven't had it forever. Yeah, so, you know, it'd be dumb for me to say it wasn't exciting to, you know, go to a burger joint. But compared to seeing your family, it's just like, your family eclipses any other joy. You don't know if your family's gonna be there or not, specifically your spouse. And as exciting as it was, everybody's yelling on the plane, singing the Marine Corps hymn, being obnoxious, throwing things. Everyone has that underlying feeling of, am I gonna come home to something? Because when you go there, nothing pauses. You feel like your life erased in a way because you're gone and everything carries on without you. So when you come back, you hope that things will be the same, and the main hope is that your family will be there, that someone will be there for you when you get back. And that doesn't happen for everybody. Some people, they come back and their spouse isn't there. When you're trying to get back into the fold of life with your family or your spouse, you have to learn to not be so aggressive because they've been taking care of everything while you were gone. They've been paying all the bills. They've been, you know, contacting family and stuff, giving everybody updates, anything that has to do with the household, any chores. They've just been a one-person wrecking crew while you were gone on this side of the world. So you can't come back and just try to change everything back to the way you had it. And once you do one deployment with a spouse, your relationship morphs into, okay, you're in charge of some stuff, but you're not in charge of everything. Because eventually you're going to leave again, and you know that. You guys become more like halfsies because they have to be able to control things while you're away. And sometimes they get really upset with us because, you know, we're like, why did you do that? Like, whoa, you just got back. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how I'm going to spend this money. It's the bill we have to pay. Like, oh, sorry. I think there's a sense of everything's moved on without you. So you feel like you have to play catch up in a way. I wouldn't say that's like the hardest, but it's definitely hard. You're trying to feel like you're doing homework 24/7, like trying to figure out, like, okay, where do I stand now that I'm back? Anybody that goes, anybody that joins the military is forever changed, period. Whether you go to war or not, you're changed. You have a new value system somewhat. You learn things that maybe you didn't know growing up about life for whatever reason. You know, just for whatever reason, it wasn't instilled in you. I would say when you go to war, it makes you appreciate things a lot more, things that you didn't. A movie that might be corny to me before I left is now exciting to me. Yeah, and then, I don't know, you come back, sometimes you have to dial it back. Also in the way of, you can't expect everybody to feel the way you feel, because you can't put that on them. They don't know it hurts when it hurts. It hurts when they say certain things. But you can't expect them to feel that way, because they just don't know. They don't know what it's like. It makes you mad. Then you'll eventually learn that you can't put that on them. They do not know. If it's within your power to educate them, great. But that still doesn't mean they know. You have to, I guess, because you're like, what the fuck do you know? Like, you know, you're sitting here complaining about something silly. There's too many people that the only thing that's going to convince you that this feeling is real is when you get to see when you get to question your own mortality. At one point, you're like, holy crap, I could have died just now. You know? Once that happens, that's the change. Really, that's when you're like, I need to wisen up. This is real. This is not fake. This is not a Nerf gun. That's a real round coming at my head. And those are real people with real feelings when you come back, and you can't hurt them the way you've been hurt. Matter of fact, it's your duty to protect them because you swore you would. You know? Yeah, not to sound corny, but against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that means from ourselves, because we may be that enemy.
Nothing was like really hard. I know you saw him, but like, is he really there, like mentally? Because the Marines do a lot of things to you, like when you were in boot camp and stuff like that, and you're doing all of that training. You have a whole shift of mentality. So was my dad really, you know, like he's home, but like is he mentally home? Like the question was, he the same person that he was a year ago, 2 years ago, and he's still in that same mindset today. So sometimes I will see it like if my dad lashes out and stuff like that, it's like, that's not the dad I know, you know? And it's only because he's inheriting what he was, you know, lashed out during the military. So it was hard mentally trying to figure out if he was, you know, like with us as a family. He was more mentally calm, and he was very unexpected. And he'll have his reasons, but then it was like, if he lashed out, it would be over something small. How do I say this? Mentally, he took the role of like the head, you know, the leader. He needed to be respected 24/7. You know, like if anything crosses the line after that, it's, you know, you're toast. Like, if you disrespect him, he's really calm about it, and he will talk to you about it. Like, you know, like, I didn't appreciate that. But then there will be other times when he's like, okay, if you want to get disrespectful, you know, we could get disrespectful. And that's when he'll lash out. you know, growing up, I really wasn't, because I was kind of scared of him, like to speak my mind and to say things, because being with my mom for so long, you know, I could go to her about everything, and I can have a civilized, friendly conversation with my mom, but with my dad, it's like, with my dad, it's like, do I talk about sports? Like, do I talk about, like, just what do I talk about? Like, do I talk about cars? Like, I couldn't go to my dad like I went to my mom about certain stuff, because I never, with him being so gone, I didn't even know how to, like, communicate, you know? Like even when, like I would always go to my mom and tell her about my feelings, and she'll tell my dad, and my dad will come into my room, you know, like, Mom shared, like, that you were, like, upset. Do you want to talk to me about it? And I would just be like, no. Not that I don't got anything to say, but it's like, how do I say it, you know, without you getting upset by what I'm saying? But definitely now, I will say a month ago we kind of actually came to terms, because after our dog died, that was a huge loss for our family, because for 14 years in our lives, that was a hard thing for my dad too. And that was just a huge loss, and that kind of made me and my dad closer, because, like, we could finally relate to something that was hard on both of us. And there was a time where, like, he didn't talk to anybody for, like, a good 3 months, because he was still in that grieving moment. And that was, like, the time where I didn't talk to him at all. But now, since Faith died, you know, I've been talking to him more, communicating my feelings. We got into a fight, actually. This was our first fight in 15 years? Like our first actual fight that, like, I poured my whole actual feelings into, and God, I just remember the look on his face. It's just like he was more upset at the fact that I didn't tell him this sooner. I didn't tell him this way before. Like, I didn't tell him the feelings that I felt when he was gone away on deployment. I didn't tell him. Like I didn't tell him how it hurt me, like, when he was gone on my birthdays, and how he wasn't there for me like Mom was, and all of these different things. And I could tell that he was like, wow. So now we're definitely closer. He wants to try to get into things more, encourage me. And, you know, all through my life, he's been encouraging me. So he's definitely trying to figure me out more. I could tell, and I'm trying to figure him out more as a father.
Late at night or even midday, whenever really, I find myself in the shower meditating over how I, as a grown, independent woman, I don't need a man. If you die, I can survive, I tell myself. I can support this family. I can take the insurance money, pay for the house, put some aside. It'll be enough. I don't need a man's touch. I will be fine without you. I'm sure. I lie. Tears are harder to see in the shower. If I do not shed half the tears for what's coming before it actually occurs, then who will hold our little ones? If I do not mourn half the could-be's now, then I will crumble when they need me the most, as they struggle to hang on to your memory, your laugh. It is my job to show them how. And I have to do it with half the tears, or not at all. Now that there are rumors of war, my visions sneak up more and more. They whisper in my ear. His whole camp will be ambushed. The people he'll go with are weak. They'll get him killed. I am incapable of escaping the maybe of your end. And you say I shouldn't have mentioned it because you want to protect me from the worry, from the truth. As if we could stop my tears by ignoring the storm. It is because you protect me that I cry. It is because I know that you know the risk you take, and so you prepare. But you are the only one that I can see preparing, and the preparation is ugly, draining for the both of us. I don't hate what you do. It's not that simple. I understand it. And that makes it more painful. I watched you die thousands of times. That was before I really understood what it meant to consider my life without you. It is because I love you for all that you are that I know you are the perfect soldier for the people you love unselfishly. It is because I know that when your death comes to you, you will not see the stupidly confident at your side or the comfortably naive. It is my face and the faces of your babies. It is us you fight for. And we will not be there to hold you. You will not come home to hold us. We will have to settle on holding each other. It's expected. I am happy you are here today. I can be sure you'll be here tomorrow. It's the someday you might not that hurts.
The first time coming home was something that I was not expecting. The overwhelming feeling of happiness, the overwhelming sense of joy and accomplishment. You know, I had made it in my mind, so I have to describe the day to you. So there was this so we got to get off of the ship by helicopter, okay? Being sent out to a nuclear power plant as what we could see. So the ship parked. I guess you could call it parked above or beyond the horizon, so you can't see anything. You can't see anything military. The only thing you'll hear is the sounds of helicopters coming towards the shore. And then we appeared over the clouds, and as soon as we landed, there was nothing there. I was expecting, you know, all the pomp and circumstance and everything, but I didn't see shit. I didn't see anything. So I'm like, okay, maybe it'll come soon. So we had to walk about 1.5 miles. And we get to this big cement open area called the parade deck, right? I was 20 years old. I see this little bouncing head coming from around the corner with little pigtails and hair, because when I left, I was holding her. So she comes running around the corner, and I see this little person who recognized me, but I didn't recognize them. And she like jumps in my arms, and I grab her, and look at goose. I get goosebumps thinking about this day. Iona, my daughter, she comes running around the corner, and she jumps in my arms, and that was the biggest hug from the smallest person I have ever felt in my life. And at the same time, I knew it was something that I never want to experience again, because I had been gone for so long. I had missed her whole life almost. And then ultimately we wound up, her mother and I wound up getting a divorce. But that day coming home, just seeing her consume me for so long, I was just in awe of the person she had become. And she was happy to see me. So when I get home, the reception from the wife wasn't the same. her mother, I remember eating a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. That was my first meal back from the Middle East, getting shot at, and I've been working all day and missing my family and wanting to be home. What I get is a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich. So I'm like, maybe that's how coming home was supposed to be, because I had never experienced something like that before. So your kids are supposed to be the ones happy, not your wife. Your kids are the ones that are going to be thankful when you see them, not your wife. She was my first and everything, you know? And I figured I was going to spend the rest of my life with her. And when I brought her back to California, she kind of like changed into this person. Now I call it a thing. But she wasn't the same. She was completely unrecognizable. Something that I should accept.
So I was deployed in 2002 to Doha, Qatar, and then April of that year I went forward to Mazar-i-Sharif, Afghanistan. We came home in 2002, and then I was deployed for the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003 until 2004. So when I came home, I started to put life back together, and I found the Department of Leadership Studies here at Fort Hays State University, and that's where I went to get my undergraduate degree. After I finished here, I moved on in my career. My wife and I moved to Wichita, and we lived there for about 7 years. And I had honestly stumbled into my career in higher education, straight out of college, as an academic advisor. I pursued my graduate degree. While I was doing that, I went through a couple of different career paths, and a position opened up here at Fort Hays teaching in the international program. And you know, I knew that what I wanted out of my career could be offered here at Fort Hays. My wife and I had 2 daughters, as my oldest is getting ready to start school. And my wife and I, both being in small towns, we knew that's where we wanted to raise our family at. So we chose to live in Wakini, and that's how I got to be here at Fort Hays as an instructor. The book was something that was in my head for a lot of time, for probably a couple of years. And it's something that I found it need to be done because I started looking for resources to kind of explain to my daughters what was going on in a way that they could understand. I started looking for resources, and I found there really wasn't anything there. You know, and with this, there are good days and there are bad days that happen. You know, after a rough day, I went home and I wrote this book in about 30 minutes at my kitchen table. And then I filed it away on my computer, and it sat there for a lot of months. And my colleague really lit a fire under me to start making steps to actually make this happen. So probably about last August, I started really looking at doing this. And I found my illustrator and I found my publisher. I wanted this to be the characters in the book. I didn't want them to be people. I wanted them to be animals because I didn't want them to be associated with any race because, you know, soldiers, we come from everywhere. So I wanted it to be animals, you know. This is just a child, and this is just a family. You know, I talk about the fire inside Dad's chest. And I remember coming home for my second tour, you know, and I still remember standing there in the trailer house my wife and I were living in at that point in my life. And where I was staying was the first time I ever felt this. And it was during probably one of a million arguments my wife and I had in the first couple of years after we came home. You know, I knew that I was a different person because of how that impacts who you are and how you handle everything. And a lot of things happen. And I say I managed it. I probably didn't manage it well, looking back. You know, 2011 was a time that I'm not gonna lie, was a very rough year for my wife and I. My closest friend was killed in Afghanistan, and it was a rough time for us. I got to the point where me and my wife, where I was going to end up being a single man. I was going to lose everything important to me. And so I took the steps and I went to the VA in Wichita, and it really did. Every piece of my life is better because I took the steps to do that. It was a very, very pride-swallowing experience to have to admit that you need help and that you can't handle everything on your own. But you know, when you're faced with losing everything, that's a choice that I had to make to keep my family together. Men are supposed to be tough, right? And then you amplified that with the kind of warrior mentality that's ingrained in them in the service. And you're always telling yourself that, oh, I know people who have it so much worse, that, you know, then that's who that stuff's for, and not for me. And it was, well, like I said, every piece of my life is better because I swallowed my pride and I went and did that. And to be honest, should have done it a lot sooner.
So here we are jumping back and forth to different households, and it was like, you know, it was always moving around, being attached to people that, you know. Driving, my mom drove us from Monterey down here every weekend for like 2 years. So that was like a 13-hour drive. So, you know, and we're two kids cooped up in the backseat of a Honda Civic, of a 94 Civic, with the woman driving down the road, you know, so we do that. We leave Friday after school, get there Saturday morning, spend Saturday with my grandparents, and then Sunday, you know, pack up and get back up to Monterey for, you know, school on Monday. Yeah. She was in the Army for about 17 and a half years. During that time, she had multiple duty stations. She was stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where she was a part of the 101st Airborne Division. She went on multiple deployments. I believe she went on 6 or 7 deployments. It was difficult. And my grandparents ended up not wanting us to leave when my mom got back from a deployment. You know, they're like, keep them here, they're doing good, you know, and we became attached. So my grandfather was like my father. You know, I spent all my time with him, taught me how to ride a bike, kind of punch harder, you know, do everything that I need to do. And so my mom took us, and they got upset, and then they tried to sue my mom for guardianship, and that lasted like 2 years. Holy crap. So during that time, I'd have supervised visits with, you know, someone in the room all the time, and I'm going here, going to all these meetings, and going to go to these counselings to make sure everything's okay, and people come in the house and check and make sure everything's okay in house. And so my grandparents tried to take guardianship of us, and then we didn't talk to them for like a whole year. And then my mom, because of that, asked for a different assignment, and that's when they sent us to Germany. And so we haven't talked to them for a year, and we're in a foreign country. A lot of the outside German economy doesn't have like they have American stuff, but it's not like a lot of American candies. And so on the commissary, I would just get like a bag of candy for like $1. Then I would take it to school and sell it for like 50 cents a piece or 75 cents. Yeah, so I started doing that in 6th and 7th grade, and then in the 8th grade, I didn't work. In Germany, the parents all stayed there. So a lot of the kids we went in 6th grade were there when we went back, and they built relationships and we didn't. So it's like we came back and like, oh, hey, what's up? I remember you from 6th grade. It's like, okay, well, I gotta dip out again. So life, and that's kind of difficult. Like, there's not one person, but I think I got like 2 friends. One that I met here when I got back. We're pretty cool, pretty close. One that I grew up with in my neighborhood. And we didn't keep in contact, but when I got back, it was like always, "Sup, brother?" I remember from my birthday, my mom asked what I wanted to do, and I told her if I could just give my grandfather a call back home. And so she let me call them back home, and then they kind of like, my grandfather and my mother talked, and they kind of like talked it out. Yeah. But, you know, he was just that. You know, he wanted to adopt me and give me his name. My mom, she was like, no, you know, it's my son. So here we are. It wasn't cool. But like I said, it made me who I am.
The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. Human beings are experts at wishful thinking and obscuring the truth. We don't really know what our soldiers go through in combat. We don't really want to know how many children are being molested and abused in our society, or how many couples engage in physical violence at some point during their relationship. We want to think of families as safe havens in a heartless world, and our own country is one populated by civilized, enlightened people. We want to believe that this cruelty can only occur in places like the Darfur or the Congo. It's hard enough to have to bear witness to pain. So why is it of any surprise that traumatized individuals themselves can't tolerate remembering it and often resort to drugs or alcohol or self-mutilation to block out their unbearable knowledge? War isn't the only calamity that leaves human lives in ruins. One doesn't have to be a combat soldier or visit a refugee camp in Syria to encounter trauma. Trauma happens to us. Happens to our friends. happens to our neighbors, it happens to our families. Did you know that more than 12 million women have been victims of rape? More than half of them occurring in women under the age of 15. 1 in every 5 Americans were sexually molested as a child. 1 out of every 4 Americans were beaten by a parent to the point of marks being left on their bodies. 1 out of 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence, and a fourth of us grew up with alcoholic relatives. Each year, about 3 million children in the US are reported as victims of child abuse and neglect. My great teacher, Elvin Semrad, he taught me that most human suffering is about love and loss, and the job of therapists is to help people acknowledge, experience, and bear the reality of life with all its pleasures and heartbreaks. He was the one that taught me. The greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. People can never get better without knowing what they know and feeling what they feel. For 100 years or more, every textbook of psychology and psychotherapy have advised that some method of talking about distressing feelings can help resolve them. However, the experience of trauma itself gets in the way of being able to do that. All trauma is pre-verbal. Under extreme conditions, people may scream obscenities, call for their mothers, howl in terror. Victims of assaults and accidents sit frozen and mute in emergency rooms. Traumatized children lose their tongues and refuse to speak. Photographs of combat soldiers show hollow-eyed men staring mutely into a void. Even years later, traumatized people have enormous difficulty telling others what has happened to them. Their bodies will re-experience the terror, rage, and helplessness, but these feelings are almost impossible to articulate. Trauma by nature drives us to the edge of comprehension. It's much easier for victims to talk about what has been done to them than it is to notice, to feel, to put into words the reality of their internal experience. Most rape victims, combat soldiers, and children who have been molested become so upset when they think about what they've experienced. They try to push it out of their minds. They try to act as if nothing has happened and move on, because it takes tremendous energy to continue functioning while carrying the memory of terror, the shame of utter weakness and vulnerability. This is why survivors of trauma often feel out of control. They fear they're damaged and beyond redemption. The greatest sources of our suffering are those lies we tell ourselves. As human beings, we belong to an extremely resilient species. I mean, we've rebounded from relentless wars, countless disasters, the violence and betrayal in our own lives. Most great instigators of social change have intimate personal knowledge of trauma. Read the life history of any visionary, and you'll find insights and passions that came from having dealt with devastation, and the same is true about our society. Most of our profound advances came from experiencing trauma, the abolition of slavery from the Civil War, Social Security in response to the Great Depression. Trauma is now our most urgent public health issue, and we have the knowledge necessary to respond effectively. The road to recovery from trauma requires learning to tell the truth, even if that truth is brutally painful. If you've been hurt, you need to acknowledge your trauma, even if that trauma is brutally painful. Silence about trauma leads to death of the soul. The choice is ours to act on what we know.
It's February, and I can finally say that he'll be home soon. They tell you that the first and last months are gonna be the hardest. But what they don't tell you is that you spend many nights over those last weeks wondering how on earth your spouse is going to fit into your life now. You wonder how you're supposed to need him in ways you haven't been able to need him for 270 days. Or how you're supposed to reattach yourself to someone that you finally trained yourself to do without. Yeah. Although, it's something you would have never chosen if given the choice. You know how to fight off armies of wasps now. How to open and open jars of pickles and pasta sauce. You know how to secure the house at night and be the protector of your family. Yeah. You know how to check your tire pressure and hang curtains now. You know how to be both mom and dad. How to cry without a shoulder. And you finally master falling asleep effortlessly in an empty bed. Yeah. Yeah, you realize the girls who have become your family are supposed to step aside and make room for your family, your real family. Just as you held on to those last moments with the service member, you hold on to those last Saturday movie pillow talks, Sunday dinners, Monday bachelor nights, and Taco Tuesdays. That at the time felt like a crutch, a gap filler. And at that time, the girls felt like substitute husbands. You lie there wide awake, wrestling with the guilt in realizing that your real family seems strange and unfamiliar. You find yourself counting all the what ifs instead of all the sheep. But you're also counting down every single second until he's back home again. You kill time by brainstorming how you reorganize the bathroom. Which side of the bed will you claim? When are you going to finally clean out his closet that has become your wardrobe overflow? You shove things aside and make room in the pantry for, yeah, Chips Ahoy and Chex Mix. Just as you making room for him again.
I realized that the soldier I was taking care of, he had an obvious fracture in his hand. and the shoulder. It was kind of all messed up. He's got a sucker in his mouth. Well, nobody had told me about these ketamine pops before this. I don't know why, but I just think he's got like a regular sucker. And then he starts telling me what he's got, and I said, ketamine sucker, I am giving you pain medication through your IV. You can't have this. Take it out of his mouth. You know, he's just laughing. He goes, you know, okay, well, make sure you put another one in my pack because when I go out tomorrow, I want to be able to have it just in case I need it. I said, honey, you are not going back out. You're going to go home. You need surgery. His fingers were just so busted. Just shattered. Like from his left arm to his fingertips, and his primary concern was going back out with his brothers the next day because he wanted to finish this job. A guy who had lost his legs had come back. He was in his wheelchair. He was a real hard ass. He had a scowl on his face. I was able to kind of tour him. I took him over to the OR, and I was kind of able to say, hey, this is where you first came in. That's where he kind of lost it, because he had gone through so many surgeries. He was actually one of the ones who told me he thought he remembered the American flag. They're all unconscious when they first come in. They're all tubed and intubated and on tons of drugs. And you're typically on a stretcher and you're on your back and you're looking up, and lining the trauma bay is this giant American flag, like lining the entire awning of the underside of the overhang. And when you're coming through, like these guys that were probably, you know, had ketamine pops or had lost so much blood they're not sure what's going on, that when you look up, you can see the American flag. And it's a big deal to a lot of people because it's like their memory sometimes is that flag. You always say a military base is American soil. Even though it's Afghanistan, it's home. You know, not everybody got to come home. As ER nurses, we would kind of prep the body up, clean them up a little bit, do all the postmortem care that we could. And we would wrap the patient in an American flag. And everybody that was in the entire hospital would line the hallways. And our commander would make all the appropriate commands. We would all salute the body as it was loaded into the caravan. It was called the final salute. We had it for every nationality. They had flags for everybody. And I thought that was cool. You know, if there was an Afghan member, you would wrap them up in their local flag and you would salute them no matter what. They always had respect from the moment that they walked into our facility until the moment that they left. I think that's probably the biggest thing that stuck with me through coming home. I can't look at an American flag without looking at the faces we lost, for sure. And I wish those guys could go home. In a weird way, that's my job. I think I get a little bit more emotional for national anthem, flags and stuff because of what it reminds me of. What am I supposed to talk about now?
I went to military school for a year. And I felt like that's where I kind of belonged, you know? Because of everything that they were doing, I've already been doing my entire life, you know? Waking up early, having inspections, doing formations, you know? Like when you got in trouble, you had to do like these marches with rifles, and I was like, man, we do that. I have to run around with my brother on my back for, you know, forever. So this is nothing. I was like, okay, this is like normal life for me. And then I ended up having to go to a public school, and when I went to a public school, that was very different. Going to a public school was going to a public school. I mean, that was like, I thought like, who are these wild animals? Like, everything was so chaotic, and like there's no structure and there's no organization and nothing. So I was like, so here I am, like used to this type of style, and then I come in and my brother was already going to a public school, so I guess he already had adapted. So that kind of just further separated us, because, you know, I was so used to structure and organization at this point, and, you know, I made that adjustment, and I tailored my life to that, versus he just was the rebel. He didn't want anything to do with that. So we were just so different. We just spread apart, you know? The military does change you, but public school, and my mom and I, we went to like a mall or something, and I wasn't too happy about leaving military school, so you say things to each other like, you're not my mom, and I don't want to be here. You know, and you don't care. You just come and leave whenever you want. You say hurtful things, and like as a kid, you don't really know, you know? It's just you just feel this way because of everything that's going on in your life, and you can't have your... Well, it's not having a life or anything. You're just kind of being pushed around. And it's because of how we were raised, you know, and also because we went to a public school. So my brother and I, we became like these little rebels. So, you know, and then we come back and my mom was like, what the hell? You know, what the hell is this? I know you guys. I know you guys know the standard and everything. And we're like, well, you weren't there. So the standard doesn't apply, you know, and this is our life now. And she's like, nah. You're in my house. And you're gonna do what I say. And I'm like, no. I'm a person. And you're constantly going back and forth. So the standard that you had was abandoned because you're coming back and having to conform to this type of environment, and now you're coming back to a whole new different environment, having to conform again. You know, and they say why they did it. You know, they say, we don't have a choice. You know, I have to do this, and it's like, well, no, you do. You do have a choice. You know, you don't have to do this. But, you know, for them, it's almost like they don't have another option. It's like, what? What was the other option? When we were living here. You know, before my mom joined, she was working 3 jobs and still wasn't making it. So, you know, and we needed stuff. You know, I needed braces, which never worked out because they were always breaking because they kept getting punched. So, yeah. I was always getting into fights. So the doctor's like, oh, might as well take the braces off. So, you know, we needed, you know, dental.
You know, it's one of those things where, like, more time apart makes a heart grow fonder. Especially during those 6 months when my mother was deployed. It was a very stressful time for me. Not just because of the deployment, but, I think, during that time period, I went to a school I really did not like being at. I was always dealing with bullying problems, and I was just that weird, different kid who, you know, didn't have a mother around, didn't have a father around, never had a father. So I didn't know that experience, and just grew up way too fast than other people knew. Yeah. Because of that, that's when I actually had to start going to therapy for the first time for PTSD and anxiety and depression problems. A lot of separation anxiety emerged from a childhood of not having somebody constantly being around, and from the fact that the person that I was attached to the most was away for a long time, in one of the most crucial moments when I needed somebody to be there. That's what the military life is. That the people that you normally get to rely on go away, you know? You don't get to rely on them. And so, there's a lot of things where there's like a lot of secret keeping in our household. Both with her and me, where we don't always communicate like normal families would. You just don't talk to each other about what you're going through. You begin to hide everything. Especially since you're just, in my case, I don't want to talk to my mother about a lot of problems that I go through because I'm so used to dealing with it on my own that there's no point in bringing it up to other people or even bringing it up to my mother. And that started affecting how I started interacting with other people in general. So I'd become a very independent person. The same as her, but that also means that it's extremely hard for both of us to be able to ask other people for help. And those people weren't there before. So what's the point of going out of my way to talk to other people when I can just deal with that myself? Like, I've always done... And it's... Like, even... It's one of those things where it's like, I know that I should talk to somebody about a lot of the problems that I have, and I should talk to my family, but it's... It's a feeling of dread, automatically, when you know that you should, but you don't do it anyways because you stress yourself out, you psych yourself out from doing it. It's extremely uncomfortable to even consider, like, them figuring out anything about my personal life. Even if it's something that's really simple. I just don't want them to be around it, and it's sad. Because then my family, that the people I should rely on the most, but I don't.
When our dog passed away a few years ago, I numbed myself while you cried. He was old. It was expected. Yes, I told you you missed him, and you lied to yourself that he would live longer. The vet assistant was moved to tears as she witnessed the bond between a grown man and his first furry child. A grown man grieving over a graying giant that struggled for his last breaths. And as the euthanasia crept through his veins, you were determined to be there, that he wouldn't be alone. But it wasn't until your grief was spent that I found mine. Many, many days later. It snuck up on me one night after I put the kids to bed. You were working an overnight shift or away for some training. I don't recall. But I do recall the shock, the awareness that I thought I was done with this thing, but it wasn't quite done with me. I missed Frank the Tank too. I also wanted to be there to send him off with love, but someone had to stay home with the kids. My shoulders shook silently with only the cold faux leather of the sofa to hug me. I have to shed at least half the tears for what's coming before it occurs. If I don't, who will hold their little ones? If I don't mourn half of the could-bes now, then I will crumble when they need me the most. As they struggle to hang on to your memory, your laugh, it's my job to show them how. And I have to do it with half the tears or not at all. And now, there are rumors of war. My visions sneak up more and more. They whisper in my ear. His whole camp will be ambushed. The people who'll go with are weak. We'll get him killed. I'm incapable of escaping the maybe of your end. It's a stench that won't leave, wisped into my nostrils by hasty politics. I don't hate what you do. It's not that simple. I understand it. And that makes it more painful. I've watched you die thousands of times. I understood what it meant to consider that I might have to live without you. And not in the sappy, over-romantic way, but in the practical, companionable way that defines what we are to each other. It's because I love you for all that you are. And I know you're the perfect soldier for the people you love unselfishly. It's us that you fight for, and we won't be there to hold you. You won't come home to hold us. We'll have to settle on holding each other. And it's expected. I know it may be coming, but it hurts. You whisper, "I got you," as you cut my arm one night, and it's not sappy. It's strangely comforting in a way that belongs to us.
Discussions of PTSD still tend to focus on recently returned soldiers, victims of terrorist bombings, and survivors of terrible accidents. But trauma remains a much larger public health issue, arguably the greatest threat to our national well-being. Trauma breeds further trauma. Hurt people hurt other people. Silence about trauma leads to death, the death of the soul. Silence reinforces the godforsaken isolation of trauma. Ignoring inner reality also eats away at your sense of self, identity, and purpose. Symptoms of PTSD tend to include statements like, "I feel dead inside." "I will never be able to feel normal emotions again." "I have permanently changed for the worse." "I feel like an object, not a person." "I have no future." And "I feel like I don't know myself anymore." Being able to say aloud to another person, being able to say aloud to another human being, "I was raped," or "I was battered by my husband," or "My parents called it discipline, but it was abuse," or "I'm not making it since I got back from Iraq," is a sign that healing can begin. We may think we can control our grief, our terror, or our shame by remaining silent. But naming offers the possibility of a different kind of control. If you've been hurt, you need to acknowledge and name what happened to you. I know from personal experience, I was chronically preoccupied with being exiled and abandoned. Only when I could talk did I start to enjoy the pleasure of my own company. Feeling listened to and understood changes our physiology. Being able to articulate a complex feeling and having our feelings recognized lights up our limbic brain and creates an ah moment. In contrast, being met with silence and incomprehension kills the spirit. Without language or context, Your awareness might be limited to, I'm scared. Yet, determined to stay in control, you are likely to avoid anybody or anything that reminds you even vaguely of your trauma. You may also alternate between being inhibited and uptight or reactive and explosive, all without knowing why. People can learn to control and change their behaviors, but only if they feel safe enough to experiment with new solutions. There can be no growth without curiosity, and no adaptability without being able to explore through trial and error who you are and what matters to you. If trauma is encoded in heartbreaking and gut-wrenching sensations, then our first priority is to help people move out of fight or flight states, reorganize their perception of danger, and manage relationships. We are fundamentally social creatures. Our brains are wired to foster working and playing together. More than anything else, being able to feel safe with other people defines mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. The critical challenge is to foster reciprocity, truly hearing and being heard, really seeing and being seen. We are fundamentally social creatures. Our brains are wired to foster working and playing together. More than anything else, being able to feel safe with other people defines mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. The critical challenge is to foster reciprocity, truly hearing and being heard, really seeing and being seen by other people. Emotional intelligence starts with labeling your own feelings and attuning to the emotions of the people around you. We teach how your brains and bodies are built, what emotions are for and where they are registered in the body, and how you can communicate your feelings to the people around you. As long as you keep secrets and suppress information, you are fundamentally at war with yourself. Hiding your core feelings takes an enormous amount of energy. It saps your motivation to pursue worthwhile goals, and it leaves you feeling bored and shut down. Meanwhile, stress hormones keep flooding your body, leading to headaches, muscle aches, and irrational behaviors that may embarrass you or hurt the people around you. Only after you identify the source of these responses can you start using your feelings as signals of problems that require your urgent attention. The critical issue is allowing yourself to know what you know. That takes an enormous amount of courage. Getting perspective on your terror and sharing it with other people can reestablish the feeling that you are a member of the human race.
So, her first deployment was when 9/11 happened. I want to say I was 6. And where she was kind of stationed, there wasn't really a lot of communication. So sometimes we would get phone calls, but they would either be staticky or the calls would drop. And then when she came back, it's really weird because you're excited and you're happy for them to come home. But then you're like, my mom wasn't always my mom. Like, she's always my mom, but different. And every time she came back, it's different. It's kind of like an adjustment. And me and my brother really didn't like it because it was portrayed as this very military style. Like, I tell you once and that's it. And as kids, I mean, we weren't bad kids, but it's kind of like we were kids. You know, and sometimes we did things and I don't know, I guess the patience level was very, very small. And if we did bad, there had to be corrective action. So like PT was a big part of our life. You know, push-ups, running, sit-ups, and a bunch of like whatever kind of things she came up with. And in 4th grade, I think we started having room inspections. You know, we would have to fold our clothes and ball up our socks and make our beds, and our room kind of had to look spotless. And those were daily. You know, so every day she would come back and we would have to have our rooms done and stand outside of our door parade rest. And then she would go in our rooms and check it. And if anything was dirty, she would pull it all out and have us go through it all over again. And every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, we would have to go and do PT with her and stand in formation with her. And back then, sometimes our car didn't work or we didn't have a car. So we walked. And so here's my mother, waking up in the morning with 2 kids, and we're walking to the base or getting a ride to the base. And then we would do PT with her in the morning. And then from PT, we would go to the gym and shower. And then from the gym, we would go to the DFAC, and then we would eat at the DFAC on base. And then we would go to school. And then from school, we would go to wherever mom was working at her office or wherever she was stationed. And then we would go home after that. And then we would do our homework, eat our dinner, and do our rooms, and do it all over again. You know, snappy on time was very important. And if she came back and you weren't adjusted, there'd be a lot of fighting, you know, a lot of yelling. And I mean, there's no adjustment period from military life to civilian life. And so just as a dependent, from my point of view, it's like every time my mom comes home, she's a little more hostile and a little more hostile. And it's like, as a kid, it's like, why is it, you know? It's kind of like it drives you away a little bit. But that life was very fast forward. I didn't have a father, and my mom would always be working. So at a very young age, I had to be the man of the house whenever my mom had to step out. And I would have to make sure that everything stayed in line, and I would have to take care of my brother. And as I grew older, it was just like, man, like the things that she's done, I mean, they don't get help when they come back. You know what? No, there's no adjustment period. And it's like you get off a plane and okay, there you are, back to the normal world. When you're living in a place that's not normal for so long, that's very, very hostile and chaotic, and it's very life and death. And it's kind of like you have these abused dogs and abused animals. And we see that now. Like you have these abused animals and you take them out and throw them back into a loving family, and they're defensive, you know, they're very aggressive. And it's like they're very like aggressive. And I mean they've been abused. And how can they, you know, they haven't had treatment. So that was very difficult when my mom came back, because it was like whoa, like, you know what, like what did I do? I don't know what I just did to piss you off or make you upset. And it's something, you know, it's like a snap. And it was like, whoa. And as I got older, I would just leave the house. I mean, as I got older, I would try to be on my own. I would run away, or I tried to run away, because I mean, I'm tired of dealing with, you know, the fighting, the yelling, the arguing, the screaming, and growing up, it's like you don't want to deal with that, you know?
On my first week there, we had a guy who stepped on an IED, and one of his legs was really bad. We were waiting for the OR, and we were just trying to sew up what we could and wait our turn. You need to go, and it's kind of like, oh, I hope this guy pulls through this serious situation, but none of us honestly thought that he would. We were doing what we could. Then the alarms went off for an incoming rocket. We all kind of looked up at each other. When that happens, we need to go put our battle gear on. Then we all do the same thing. We step away from this guy, he's gonna die, because we all had our hands on something that was trying to make the bleeding stop. So the whole time, the alarms went off and nobody moved. The chances of a rocket actually making it back to where we were was probably small, but there's this really unfortunate reminder, like 3 years prior to us, a rocket did hit literally the top of the trauma bay. You can see where they repaired it years ago. It's this daunting thing, like it probably wouldn't happen, but that one time it totally did. We made a decision, and it was risky, but you know, that's kind of what we all signed up to do. And we were more than happy to be there to help that guy. And I know for a fact that that individual surprisingly made it. And he stayed with us for a very long time. They were able to save one of his foot. There was situations like that a lot, where we felt like we had to choose between our safety and our job. The other thing with the deployment that was hard, because we had people kill themselves. It would be people from the rotation before us, and that was really hard. You would get scared, like, I hope that doesn't happen to me. I hope my mind isn't turned to depression and sadness. Not that I've ever had suicidal thoughts, but the people that killed themselves, we were so surprised and so sad. And I don't know how you fix it. It's a big military problem. I don't have an answer for why there's such high suicide rates in the military. And neither do they, evidently, because the rates keep on going up. And they keep on instituting, in my opinion, some very weird programs. When you first come home, they call you a lot. And it's really silly because their way of checking on you is a phone call. They go, do you have any thoughts of hurting yourself or others? Have you had any thoughts of this? And some lady hangs up with you and goes, okay, you're clear for mental health assessment, which I don't know how they think that helps. It was almost like a reminder to be like, oh yeah, you were just in Afghanistan, don't kill yourself. And that's what all those phone calls were. So it almost made me angry. This is what you're doing for us? This is how you're making sure we're okay with a phone call? So it's almost frustrating then, too, for the people that did kill themselves. I'm sure they all got the same phone call we did. And clearly, it didn't make a difference. We don't do enough with the mental health for our people. Whether they're deployed or not. I think about those people who maybe had struggles with deployment. They were by themselves. You were just around 200 of your best friends that were in your med group. And then you go back home and you suddenly lost your military family that you were really close with. And now you're isolated. It's not exactly a warm welcoming like you see on TV. Those picturesque greetings don't always work. When I got off the plane, it was kind of like, I wish everybody else was here.
At one point, I and the men I was with made our way to a frontline position that had just been taken from the Taliban and arrived in time for the counterattack. We curled up in the slit trenches and listened to rockets come screaming in. The Northern Alliance had no artillery to speak of, so all we could do was stay down and wait for the Taliban to run out of rockets. We eventually managed to get out of there, though we lost one of our pack horses in the barrage. I felt deranged for days afterwards, as if I'd lived through the end of the world. By the time I got home, though, I'd stopped thinking about that or any of the other horrific things we'd seen. Casualties from an assault through a minefield, starving civilians, MiG jets circling us looking for a place to drop their bombs. I mentally buried all of it until one day, a few months later, when I went into the subway at rush hour to catch the C train downtown. Suddenly I found myself backed up against an iron support column, convinced I was going to die. For some reason, everything seemed like a threat. There were too many people on the platform, the trains were moving too fast, the lights were too bright, the world was too loud. I couldn't really explain what was wrong, but I was more scared than I'd ever been in Afghanistan. I stood there with my back to the column until I couldn't take it anymore, and I sprinted for the exit and walked home. I had no idea that what I'd just experienced had to do with combat. I just thought I was going crazy. For the next several months, I kept having panic attacks whenever I was in a small place with too many people. Airplanes, bars. The incidents eventually stopped happening, and I didn't think about it again until 2 or 3 years later when I found myself at a family picnic talking to a woman who worked as a psychotherapist. The United States had just invaded Iraq, and that may have been what prompted her to ask if I'd been traumatized by the wars I'd covered. Told her I didn't think so, but that for a while I'd had panic attacks in crowded places. She nodded. That's called post-traumatic stress disorder. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the next few years. What I had was classic short-term PTSD. From an evolutionary perspective, it's exactly the kind of response you want to have when your life is in danger. You want to be vigilant. You want to avoid situations where you're not in control. You want to react to strange noises. You want to sleep lightly and wake easily. You want to have flashbacks and nightmares that remind you of threats to your life, and you want to be, in turns, angry and depressed. Anger keeps you ready to fight, and depression keeps you from being too active, putting yourself in more danger. All humans react to trauma this way. It may be unpleasant, but it's preferable to getting killed. My panic attacks eased up and eventually stopped, though a strange emotionality took their place. I found myself tearing up at things that I otherwise would have just smiled at or not noticed at all. Once, I got so emotional watching an elderly clerk do her job at the post office that I had to leave and come back later. It happened in my sleep, too. Strange combat dreams that weren't scary, but somehow triggered a catastrophic outpouring of sorrow. I would wake up and just lie there in the dark, trying to figure out why feelings that seemed to belong to other people kept spilling out of me. I wasn't a soldier, and at that point I hadn't lost any close friends in combat, and yet When I went to sleep, it was like I became part of some larger human experience that was utterly heartbreaking. It was far too much to acknowledge when I was awake.
Yeah. His last appointment was when I was in high school, and he was living in Hawaii and I was living in Utah, and we really didn't see him. So he would come visit us, and it was like a big novelty because we just didn't see him. And so he would like take a leave and hang out with us for like a month and a half, and then he'd go back to Hawaii. Yeah, it was just like having my dad like hanging with a friend. Like we just watched movies and sit and like we're cuddly, and we really don't do like big elaborate stuff. Like he just likes to chat, and he's kind of a homebody. And it's like I'm daddy's little girl, you know, like my siblings know I'm a favorite. And so when my parents, when they got back together, I was a junior, and my sister was like 11. And it's really crazy how like I didn't realize then how much of her life she went without him. And she would just like hold on to him. I mean, he's like the man of steel. Like he's Superman, and I mean, we always made him out to be this hero in the house. And yeah, he's just like the man of steel. He's Superman. And being so young, I don't think I really noticed the differences, you know? Like I don't know, I just kind of think just kind of like a shift in like I think you mean like I was just too young to notice, right? Like I know my dad's not the same man he was when I was younger, but I was just too young, you know, and I just wasn't intuitive enough to really notice the differences, and for the most part I was just super little, and it just was what it was. And I've been exposed to a lot of diversity. I've seen all kinds of cultures, family dynamics, and it's together or separate. I think it's made me more open-minded. I think having that kind of lens on a person makes them better. Right?
So I was 24 when I got deployed and my son was 2. So he was really young, you know, and it was hard because I felt like he wasn't going to remember who I was when I came back. But I was a single mom, I was financially struggling, and with your deployment, you get your opportunity paid, you get your dependent pay, and I was also deployed to combat zones, so you get your combat hazard pay on top of that. So I was going to be making a lot more money than I currently been making. And I had a lot of debts that I needed to pay off. So this is a perfect opportunity. It'll be okay for me to leave for like 7-8 months and it'll be fine. But I remember waking up and it was 2 o'clock in the morning when we were leaving, and my son, who had already been asleep, I woke him up to say goodbye, and like he did not want me to leave. Like the first time in his life that he had actually like screamed because he didn't want me to leave. And I'm trying to pull myself together because all of our Marines, the circus group of 16 of us, they were all in the hotel lobby downstairs because that's where we were being picked up, and my son like would not let me go. And I immediately started bawling my eyes out because it's like, oh my gosh, like I thought this was going to be kind of an easy thing, you know? Like I was just going to say goodbye real quick, then put them back down to go back to bed. And I see my Marines are looking at me and they're starting to tear up too because they have also left kids. Everybody just expects you to be rough and tough and ready for everything, and when they see Marines like, you know, not living up to that standard, they kind of take a step back and they're like, you need to stop it, and you need to suck it up, and you need to get over it because we're about to deploy. I have a really cute video of us doing like the cliche run in the airport, and you know, he couldn't say very many words. He could say mama, mama, and it was the cutest homecoming video I think you will ever see in your life because he was, you know, it was amazing, and he was so much taller and he knew more words than I thought he did. He didn't know many, but he learned new ones. My son was a completely different person when I came home, and it was a struggle trying to figure out what he liked now and what he didn't like. And he knew me like he knew I was his mom, but there was a power struggle. And so like even trying to tell him no was, he was also on his terrible 2s going on 3s, and so he was a nightmare. And me being as anxious as I was, not knowing who my son was anymore, I didn't know who my son was. My deployment turned to shit. It was all for nothing. And everything I had to text my son's father, like, listen, this is what's happening right now. And his immediate response was, well, you should just give up custody of your son because you obviously can't handle this. And I was like, awesome, you know? And there was actually a year from 2017 to 2018 where I was actually like bedridden, and my son's father and I had gone through a custody issue, and it was hard, and it led to this depression and everything, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't work. And it got worse before it got better. We eventually did come to a custody agreement. We decided to keep him there in Illinois, and when he has like a natural break in school because he's, you know, moving grades, that's when he'll come to California. So he might be here next August, which is awesome.
My dad and I started getting into it a lot. July 4th came around and we started butting heads, and it's like, all right, I can't stay here. July 4th is supposed to be a happy time, you know? 3 o'clock in the morning, my dad, who's drunk on God knows what, high or whatever, I don't know, he came down to my room, and I have never actually told the details of this story to anybody except for my therapist. He came down to the basement where I was sleeping, and at first it was like, party time, what are you doing? Hey, let's get up, you know, why are you sleeping? Whatever. I was like, Dad, leave me alone, like I don't really feel like celebrating tonight, you know? I'm already asleep. I had a beer, that was it, but he didn't stop. And he climbed into bed with me, and he grabbed my wrists, and he buried his face into my neck, and he pinned me to the bed, and I didn't realize then what he was trying to do until I went to therapy and we started peeling back the onion layers. They say in traumatic events like this, you have these responses. You either fight, or you freeze, or you run, and luckily for me, my first response was to fight my way through this. So when I eventually realized what my dad was trying to do, I dug my foot, my heel of my foot into it somehow. I can turn it around because I was sleeping on my stomach, and I sat up and I went back and I dug my foot into his hip and I threw him across the room. I launched him, and as soon as he hit the floor, he blacked out. And I can see it was the visible change in his expression. And he came back after this, swinging, and we wrestled to the floor, and I just beat the shit out of my dad. I bloodied his nose, and broke his jaw, cracked a few ribs. You know, it feels like a lifetime in that moment, because you're thinking 1,000 steps ahead of what you need to be doing right at that moment. Like, what do I do? What do I grab? Where do I go? You know, my brother was there with me too, and so my first thought was like, I need to get myself and my brother and myself, and we just need to go. And then my uncle came downstairs, and thankfully, and he drug him away, and I ran upstairs, and I wake up my brother, and I say, we need to go now, and then I hear him coming up the steps, and I shove my body as far up to the counter behind the fridge as I can, and I open the back door so that he'll think I was going, because here's the back door, and here's the kitchen door, and here's the fridge. And so I stand on the other side of the fridge, and he walks right out the back door like I hoped he would. But then he stops, and he turns, and he sees me right there. Coming to the realization that my dad tried to sexually assault me was the worst thing imaginable, because that's your parents. They're supposed to protect you. You're supposed to have a good relationship with your father. We were face to face, and I was like, do it. Whatever you're about to do, do it. I don't care, I'm going to kill you, and he just backs away. And I grab my brother, and I grab my keys, and we leave. You know, I think the hardest part about going through all of this was my mother, because when I realized what had happened to me and I told her when it happened, her immediate response was, I don't think he could do that. And so it's like both of my parents, my mom, I love her to death, and she's been through her own shit, so I can forgive her for saying that, but these are my parents. These are the people that are supposed to protect me and love me unconditionally and have my back through everything. And so it was just a lot. And that was my coming home.
My mom was 15 when she had me and 16 when she had my brother. She was working 3 jobs: Burger King, the bank, and Kmart. And still wasn't making it, you know? So my mom, she joined the Army, and that was the way to provide for us. The first time my mom got deployed, I think I was 5 years old. And, you know, as kids, we didn't have a good understanding of what the military was like. And when she left, it was almost like, you know, and now we're here with our grandparents. And then she's never been to, you know, Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, and suddenly you're in the middle of a war zone, and then you have to come back and adjust to life. And you know, I can only imagine what my mom went through, because she was a single parent with 2 kids that don't really understand what's going on. So when she came back, we had to move with her to California, and at that time it was like, even though you're a mom, you're like a stranger to us. And so that was you know, that's weird to think about that. Like, you know, you're a biological parent, and you feel like they're a stranger to you. And so we ended up living with her, and we started having room inspections. So every day my mom would come home, and we would have room inspections. Like, we would have to stand outside our door at parade rest, and she would go in and inspect our rooms, like even in the window cracks, in the window sill, you know, like look and make sure that there's no dirt or anything. And if there was anything wrong, you'd have to do the room all over again. And you know, there was like a certain standard, and if you didn't meet that standard, it wasn't you know, we weren't it wasn't taken lightly, even because we were kids, you know. We were held to a very high standard, and that was tough as a kid, you know, having to adjust to this military life, and ultimately being like mini soldiers, you know. And so it was you know, it was important, you know. Eating our food was important, and sometimes as a kid you didn't want food, and you're like, and you just like push it away, and you're like, nah, I don't want it. But for my mother, it was, well, you're going to eat the food because that's, you know, your food, and a lot of people don't have food. You know, because when they go overseas, the kids that are over there are starving, and it you know, it resonates with them. But when we didn't eat our food, we weren't going to get up from the table. Like, you're sitting there at the table and you can't get up, and you end up falling asleep at the table, and you wake up the next morning and have to go to school. And you know, if you didn't eat your food, if you didn't eat that food for dinner, that food was going to be waiting for you in the morning when you woke up. And you know, we couldn't go outside either, because it was a weird time, and you know, as kids you might be playing in the house, and if you're playing in the house you might break something, and if you broke something, it's not you know, sometimes for us it wouldn't have been, you know, for us it wouldn't have been like, you know, just the regular scolding. Like for us it might have been you know, like a whooping, or we even used to stand in the corner of the wall at parade rest like you would in formation, with our noses touching the wall, and sometimes we would have to stand there for like 2-3 hours just staring at the wall, and you can't do anything but stare at that crack in the wall. So you're like just standing there, you know, thinking, you know, kind of just reflecting, kind of just, and you know, like, what can you do? Like, we're just here staring at a crack at the wall for hours. And that's it. So, you know, it mentally it kind of plays with you a little bit, you know. And then being yelled at like somebody in the military is kind of scary too, you know, especially when you're not used to it. You know, it's it's like, holy crap, you know, this is my mom.
So, while there's angst and adjustment, there's also pure bliss amidst the anticipation of it all. Imagining over and over again that the moment we lay eyes on each other across Cooper Field, running into his arms with our son, and bringing him into our house that is finally a home again. Watching him be a dad. Watching my son have a dad. Watching us be a family of 3 for the first time in what feels like forever. I'm excited for the days with my husband to feel normal again, when I feel a kiss, and moments later, hear his truck engine at 6 in the morning. When laundry is complicated by having to separate lace panties from the Velcro on his uniforms. And for a tall shadow to join us on our walks. I'm excited for my son to learn that the word dada means a person and not a phone. I look forward to Sunday mornings, smelling coffee, and hearing the laughter of father-son horseplay as I curl my hair for church, instead of rip out my hair as my son attempts to play in the trash, the toilet, the water bowl. All I want is to look pretty just one day of the week. Just because I've been forced to make a life without him doesn't mean it can't go right back to how it used to be. And I don't have to flush my new independence down the toilet, along with the lipstick my son threw in there. I'll just put it in my pocket for later. When the time comes to say goodbye again. And I will gladly push aside the potato chips in the pantry. They're not as good as Chips Ahoy anyway.
When I got back, this is after 2 and 3. So deployments 2 and 3. I had moved into the barracks. I was a corporal. Right? I was an E4, and I was awaiting orders to start my life anew. That's how I felt. And then I get promoted to the next rank, right? I'm a sergeant, and I'm like, yes, right? Everything's going my way. And my orders get mixed around for a little bit, and I finally land at the School of Infantry as an instructor. Camp Pendleton, actually not too far from here. And I do that for a couple years, and I work out the whole divorce thing with my first wife. And I'm thinking everything's gonna be okay, right? I get orders to recruiting duty. And recruiting duty proved to be such a challenge for me, but But I turned around and got strung out on cocaine. It was the one thing that was untraceable at the time, and I used it to stay awake. And then you feel good, right? So why not? And you know, I harbored a lot of anger, right? For a long time. I experienced all that stuff. And I mean, it really came to a head with my second wife. Right? I was only married to her for 6 months, but she decided to leave me and go back to her ex-husband. Right, so a 6-month failed marriage in there, fueled by alcohol and sex and everything that was wrong. So I moved her out to California, and I was in Chicago all by myself, right? This is a brand new life for me. This is what I'm doing. And she calls me one day and she says, "Hey, things aren't working out for me. Come get me." So I did it in a weekend, right? Hopped on a plane, had her pack her car. She met me at the airport Friday night, drove back to Chicago that weekend, got back into work on Monday, right? Moved her and all of her stuff in, and she decided to leave me and go back to her ex-husband. And I found out by a note that she had written and tried to tear up and leave in the garbage after she'd left. Right, so I knew I was a failure at that point. So I lived next door to this Chicago cop, right? And we would go shooting at the range. And one night I go to him, right? And I'd already been drinking. I was coked out of my mind and I was done, right? So I knock on his door and I say, "Hey, can I borrow your Glock if I'm just gonna, use it in the morning when I go to the range?" And he says, "Oh yeah, sure," right? Unloads it, hands it to me. And I was living way above my means, right? I was a single infantry guy with extra duty pay, with way too much money, with way too much freedom. And all I could think about was all of the bad stuff that I'd done in my life. I just didn't think God would forgive me for all the stuff I'd done at that point. So I figured I'd go and talk to him about it. Anyway, when I flew to get my ex-wife, I left the woman who is my current wife the key to my apartment. She watched everything for me. I'd totally forgotten I'd given her that key. Right, so I get the gun from the Chicago cop, and I go into my downstairs basement because I don't want the noise to be too loud. It's right below street level. And I didn't have a silencer, so me being a demolitions expert, I had planned this all out as to exactly how I was going to do it. Right, see, what I was going to use is hydrostatic pressure, because what I was going to cause is I was going to fill my mouth up with water, right? And that would be the charge to pop the top of my head off when I pulled the trigger. Right, so I'm sitting on the toilet and I fill my mouth up with water and I charge the weapon and I put it under my chin. And then I hear my door open and some heels. Right, so I sit up real quick, swallow the water, pull my pants down, act like I'm going to the bathroom. And who is it other than my current wife? She walked in right before I was about to pull the trigger. Said, "Hey, do you want to go to the movies?" You know, I paused. I thought to myself, I'm not supposed to go yet. Yeah.
Today's veterans often come home to find that, although they're willing to die for their country, they're not quite sure how to live for it. It's hard to live for a country that's constantly tearing itself apart along every possible ethnic and demographic boundary. The income gap continues to widen. Many people still live in radically segregated communities. The elderly are mostly sequestered from public life, and rampage shootings happen with such normalcy that they only remain in the news cycle for about a day or two. To make matters even worse, some politicians accuse their rivals of deliberately trying to harm the country, a charge so destructive to group unity that most past societies would have punished it as a form of treason. It's complete madness, and veterans know this. In combat, soldiers all but ignore differences between race, religion, and politics within their platoon. It's no wonder they get so depressed when they come home. Many attest to having the same experiences and going through this oppression. First, there's a kind of shock at the level of comfort and affluence that we enjoy, but that is soon followed by the dismal realization that we live in a country that is at war with itself. People speak with incredible contempt about, depending on your views, the rich, the poor, the educated, the foreign-born, the president, or the entire United States government. It is a level of contempt that is usually reserved for our enemies in wartime, except now we apply it to our fellow citizens. Unlike criticism, contempt is particularly toxic because it assumes a moral superiority within the speaker. Contempt is often directed at people who have been excluded from a group or declared unworthy of its benefits. Contempt is often used by governments to provide rhetorical cover for torture or abuse. Contempt is one of 4 behaviors that, statistically, can predict divorce in married couples. People who speak contempt for one another will probably not remain united for long. The most alarming rhetoric comes out of the dispute between liberals and conservatives, and it's a dangerous waste of time because they're both right. Perennial conservative concerns regarding high taxes supporting a non-working underclass have entirely legitimate roots in our evolutionary past and shouldn't be dismissed. Early hominids lived a precarious existence where freeloaders were a direct threat to their survival, so they developed a keen sense knowing they were being taken advantage of by their fellow group members. But by the same token, one of the hallmarks of early human society was the emergence of a culture of compassion, one that cared for the ill, the elderly, the wounded, the weak, and the unlucky. In today's terms, that is a common liberal concern that must also be taken into account. These 2 driving forces have been a part of our human society for hundreds of thousands of years and have been duly codified in our nation as the 2-party political system. The eternal argument over so-called entitlement programs and, more broadly, liberal versus conservative thought will never be resolved because both sides represent an ancient and absolutely essential component of our evolutionary past. So, how does one unify a wealthy, secure country that has sunk itself into a zero-sum political game? How do we make veterans feel that they are returning to a society that was cohesive and worth fighting for to begin with? The United States is so powerful that the only country capable of defeating her might be the United States herself, which would mean the ultimate terrorist strategy would be to leave the country alone. That way, America's ugliest partisan tendencies could emerge unimpeded by the unifying effects of war. The ultimate betrayal of tribe isn't acting competitively. That should be encouraged, but predicating your power on the excommunication of others from the group. That is what politicians of both sides do when they spew venomous rhetoric about their rivals. This is what media figures do when they go beyond criticism and openly revile their fellow citizens. Reviling someone you share a combat outpost with is an incredibly stupid thing to do, and public figures who don't imagine their country as one huge combat outpost are deluding themselves.